It's time to go into something that has been aching at me for years. Passion, creativity, memes, action, reconnaissance, infiltration, deterrence, conspiracies, and snacks.
Kept you waiting, huh? Kept you waiting, huh? Kept you waiting, huh? Kept you waiting, huh? Kept you waiting, huh?
Kept you waiting, huh?
In my last video, I discussed how Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is my personal stepping stone of getting into one of my favorite game series. Go check it out for more details, and an in-depth analysis of it. Now in this video onwards, we're going to start the Metal Gear retrospective proper by exploring the humble beginnings, how it garnered mainstream success, and so on. It's time to let it all out, and analyze what makes this franchise so special to me, and why I go into great detail talking about entertainment to begin with. One of my main reasons behind it was seeing something from the creator's perspective. Hideo Kojima is who many consider a legendary, influential auteur of video games today. But like every legend, he started off as an underdog. Born in Setagaya, Tokyo on August 24th, 1963, he was raised through moving from place to place across Japan with his family. He developed a passion for film and having an eye for detail like his father, two aspects that would influence his works. This is one prime example of good genes and memes being passed on to the new generation. When it came to movies, he and his family watched films across many genres like horror, westerns, and science fiction. They had a tradition of watching a movie in full before going to bed. It's adequate to say his childhood was unlike most kids growing up. Books would also play a part of his endeavors as well, as evidenced by a series of short essays in his book, The Creative Gene. His quote rings very true today: "A world without books is inconceivable." Going forward, I will use this book to cite references that influenced Kojima when it's relevant. At age 13, Hideo's father Kingo would pass away, but it only strengthened his resolve of being a storyteller. For years, he would try to write and publish short stories for newspapers and magazines, but would get rejected time and again for how long form they are, the length being around 400 pages as opposed to 100. He wasn't able to tell the full scope of his stories, with short being part of the criteria. You could say he is one of the original long men. While he moved on to studying economics in college, he still had aspirations of being a film director. At least, that's what he wanted to do originally. But inspiration would come in the form of video games, more specifically from old computer systems back then, and the Nintendo Famicom, the Japanese NES. The few games that would influence Hideo Kojima were Nintendo's own Super Mario Bros., the Portopia serial murder case from Enix, and of all things, Hideo. It just goes to show that something considered outright horrible or forgettable can inspire something not just creative, but far better in every way. So Kojima told his colleagues that he would be pursuing a career in video game development, despite their doubts and pleas. The reason for that was the gaming industry wasn't that big and profitable in Japan at the time. Regardless of such, Hideo's mother would support and encourage him to go against the grain and follow his passion. In 1986, Kojima was hired by Konami and worked under the MSX home computer division as a designer and planner. He wasn't fond of the limitations the hardware had, with poor performance, rendering many sprites on the screen at once, and the limited color palettes. Considering the way Vampire Killer looked on the thing, that would be the case, but beggars can't be choosers. Work with what you got for now. Being the underdog that he was, his ideas for gameplay were initially overlooked, and due to his lack of familiarity with programming, his peers would look down on him. He considered leaving Konami, but stuck to his guns. The first title he worked on was a little game called Penguin Adventure as an assistant director, which is pretty silly to think about now. But after that, his patience paid off as he was given full control to Konami's new intellectual property. That of course would be Metal Gear, released in 1987. Hello, Kyle Reese from The Terminator. The Metal Gear series began on the MSX2 home computer, which was popular in Japan and was distributed across Europe. Sorry, America. The original idea for the game was to be another action shooter similar to Capcom's Commando. But honestly, it sounds repetitive when you consider Konami already had an action shooter, Contra. Their perspectives may be different, but you're still shooting enemies. With the limitations on the hardware, Hideo Kojima would think outside of the box by turning to movies like the 007 series and The Great Escape to make a more sophisticated action game where the core design would be to avoid combat as much as possible. Thus began a title that started a new action subgenre, the first stealth tactical espionage game. The rest of the world wouldn't get the original MSX Metal Gear titles until years later when they were ported under MGS3 Subsistence, the PC ports under the GOG platform, at least for the first one, and the soon-to-be-released Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 1 at the time of making this video. For now, we're going to be playing the GOG release of the first game on PC. This is actually my first time playing the original MSX Metal Gear titles, believe it or not, so this is going to be a new experience for someone who played the later titles beforehand. Being the first game in a franchise that would eventually become more complex and profound, it starts off rather straightforward. The game's setting takes place on a pseudo-historical timeline in the year 1995. The West would receive intel about a weapon of mass destruction that is being constructed in a fortress called Outer Heaven, located 200 kilometers north of the region of Galsburg, South Africa. A special forces unit called Foxhound, led by the legendary Big Boss, dispatched their best soldier Grey Fox to infiltrate the base. A few days later, they would lose contact with him, his last transmission being 2 words: Metal Gear. So begins Operation Intrude N313, where Big Boss sends a rookie agent to rescue Grey Fox and find out what Metal Gear is. His name? Solid Snake. I know that name can mean one of 2 things. First being an obvious reference to Snake Plissken from the 1981 John Carpenter film Escape from New York. The other meaning? Solid Snake sounds like a porn star name when you remove the context. You might as well call him Rigid Rod while you're at it. On to the gameplay. As Rigid Rod Solid Snake, you must move into Outer Heaven and investigate different locations while using the environment to avoid enemy soldiers on patrol. When you start off, you are completely naked. No, that's not another lewd joke. It means you do not have any weapons and equipment with you. You can only take items once they are picked up in the field, and there are many hidden places where key items can be found in order to progress through the game. Once you are seen, you enter alert mode, so you have to find a place to hide or retreat someplace else to cease the alert. There are 2 ways an alert mode can play out. The first is when you are seen and only 1 exclamation mark appears over a soldier's head. Once that happens, only enemies on the current screen go after you. You move to another adjacent screen to stop it and go back to the previous one as if it never happened at all. The other is when you are detected and 2 exclamation marks appear over a soldier's head, which means enemy reinforcements from different screens can come in to attack you. This alert phase is the most prominent since you can also be detected by a camera, an infrared sensor, or setting off an explosive or shooting your gun without a silencer, so don't make any noise. To avoid the infrared sensors, you would have to find thermal goggles or use the carton of cigarettes you brought with you at the start. Hey kids, smoke up. As for the cameras, you would have to find a cardboard box, the greatest tool of stealth technology in the world, and would continue to be one throughout the series. How ironic that a man who thought outside the box would use the box itself as a game mechanic. When you get overwhelmed by enemy soldiers, your only means of escape are to go into an elevator, leave the current building, or enter an arena for a boss fight. If you are supplied with better weapons and enough ammunition for battle, you can take on the enemy reinforcements until the alert stops. There's even some obstacles that are considered more of a nuisance than a threat, like the dogs. They just chase you around. You know, who goes around punching dogs and shooting them? Damn! Some weapons can also be used in order to help you progress, like using a guided missile to destroy control panels for electric floors, and using plastic explosives to blow up holes in walls, but there is no way to distinguish what you can destroy. No cracked walls or anything. In order to restore your health, you pick up rations and use them in the item screen. Ammo and rations can be easy to farm by leaving the screen and returning to pick them up. Occasionally, you get them from taking out enemies. Your ammo and ration counts can be upgraded by increasing your rank. This is achieved by rescuing prisoners of war. Some can even provide relevant intel on the base and what you should do next. Like I said, some would give you intel. This is Steve. Diane? If I know Diane, she's gone shopping and won't have come back yet. Or hasn't come back yet. Whatever. Also, why would she be shopping while I'm in the middle of something important? Doesn't she have her own job to do during this operation? Are you pulling my leg, Steve? What's her specialty? Oh, I see. She's a resistance member fighting Outer Heaven, using her feminine charm to gather intel about the mercenaries and armaments. She gives you information about the bosses you fight against as well, but if you are well equipped and know some exploits, you can take them out in no time flat. Now, there's no denying the game left an impact, but for something that is thought outside of the box, this is still a pretty basic game. You can exploit just about everything. The most particular one is enemy soldiers having tunnel vision. They don't look in any other general direction than north, south, east, and west. Even most of the bosses can be taken care of easily when you position yourself just right in order to avoid enemy fire and using a weapon with explosive power to take them out. I wouldn't even call the bosses memorable. What are these names? Shotmaker? Machine Gun Kid? Fire Trooper, Dirty Duck? Pretty much the only cool name is Bloody Brad. Two of them, since they are Terminator-like cyborgs with an AI. Yeah, keeping with Snake's resemblance to Kyle Reese. Anyway, what about the rest of your contacts you talk to in your transceiver? I wish I could tell you who they are, but at the start of the game, Big Boss is your main point of contact, and he doesn't give you the other frequencies. He briefly mentions Schneider, a resistance leader fighting Outer Heaven, but he gives no contact number. Either the enemy may be listening in, or Big Boss is being sus. There's one contact named Jennifer who won't talk to you about getting equipment that is essential to completing your mission, unless your rank is at level 4. Rescue as many hostages as you can, and don't kill them because doing so will cause you to get demoted. Killing enough will cause you to break your game and start over. Hell, when you fight Dirty Duck, he has 3 hostages with him, including Jennifer's brother. Kill him by accident and she won't talk to you anymore. That's definitely fighting dirty for ya, fucker. Along with picking up ammo, rations, and other important stuff, there are also these key cards you pick up, each with their own individual slots in the item menu. You use them to go through specific doors that will open when you have the right key card equipped. That's right, none of the doors have specific labels for you to differentiate which one you should use. It would have helped better if the cards stacked. I mean, look at this. The item screen looks disorganized. It's even more of a pain when you're in the room filled with poison gas. Why can't you use a key card and the gas mask at the same time? Doesn't help anything when Big Boss forgets to tell you about that. Sure he did. This is my first time playing this game, and I understand at the time you would have to discover these things on your own. But running around Outer Heaven and backtracking to specific areas to get what you need and figure out where you need to go next makes me feel like a rat in a maze rather than a snake. How was I supposed to know where those trapdoors are? Why does the security door randomly open by just punching it while you don't have your equipment and keycards with you? Going back to destroying specific walls to find secret passages for equipment, it wouldn't surprise me if Hideo Kojima took inspiration from the first Legend of Zelda as well. So by all means, don't be afraid to use a guide like the wiki or a YouTube walkthrough to save yourself the time and stress. That's all I have to say about the gameplay and exploits. Let's go through the rest of the story. When it comes to the main mission at hand, you find Grey Fox and he gives you intel about the TX-55 Metal Gear, an all-terrain walking bipedal weapon that is considered a massive threat to other conventional armed vehicles and is capable of launching nukes at anywhere in the world. We are tasked to find Dr. Drago Petrovich Madnar, the creator of the mech who is hidden deep within the base. Eventually we find him, but then we are tasked to rescue his daughter Ellen so he could trust us enough to tell us how to destroy it. You're supposed to use 16 sets of plastic explosives to plant them on the feet, since they're the only weak point and it must be done in a specific order. But in case you fuck up, gather as much as you can. You write down the combination of letters he says, but then he forgets the last one. Goody. As you get closer and closer to your main objective, Big Boss will contact you, acting very unusual as he leads Snake to a firing squad and a few death traps. You rescue a prisoner that tells you that Big Boss is the leader of Outer Heaven all along. Then this traitor does the most mind-blowing thing to ever happen in a video game. Break the fourth wall by telling Snake to turn off the PC. Can you imagine if someone took that literally, believing that would help them beat the game?
Don't be so dense.
Finally, we make it to Metal Gear, stationary in the hangar and protected by gun cameras. While you're avoiding them, you plant the C4 in this specific order, take a wild guess with the last one, and that's it. That's pretty anticlimactic, not gonna lie. Metal Gear doesn't do anything while you're trying to set off the C4, but we see that destroying it activates the self-destruct sequence for Outer Heaven. So while he escapes, Snake runs into Big Boss blocking the path, deciding to take the fight to him. It's so funny to me that the final boss in the game was hiding in plain sight the whole time. I mean, it's his name after all. Big Boss is the final boss. Clever, Kojima. Clever. He meant to use Snake to report misinformation back to the West and help Outer Heaven become the most powerful nation in the world, but he proved to be too successful due to his resourcefulness and refusing to die. Snake fights Big Boss as he quickly moves around the room. From a few hits with a rocket launcher, he dies. Snake makes a run for it with Outer Heaven going out in a massive explosion. But then... and that's Metal Gear. It took me 3.5 hours to beat this game for my first time. It can be beaten in less than 2 hours if you know what to do. For me, it was necessary to use a guide whenever I got stuck. And of course, you get ranked based on your overall performance. This ultimately showed the potential for the series going forward, with gameplay elements ahead of its time, albeit basic and exploitable here. But of course, it would only get even better from here on. The game's sound design is crisp, and the music is good. despite listening to the theme of Terra constantly during gameplay. The graphics are decent for an 8-bit title, and while the story may be basic, the twist near the end makes it stand out and is one of the most important events fans remember this game for, especially for what will come after this. Metal Gear is not important for what it is, but for what it started. Sometime after that, the game would get a butchered port on the NES and Famicom. Despite the weird changes and the actual mech being absent in this version, it sold well enough in the West, so much so that it would get a non-canon sequel, Snake's Revenge. Yeah, Hideo Kojima wasn't involved with this version of Metal Gear, nor the latter. I'll go into detail with those games in a separate video dedicated to Metal Gear titles without Kojima's direct involvement, which means I would also have to talk about... Let's cross that bridge when we get to it! For now, let's talk about the true sequel, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, released in 1990. The footage that I recorded here is from Disc 2 of MGS3 Subsistence, where it contains the first two games. Right from the get-go, you're met with a toe-tapping opening theme and a cool credits sequence containing well-detailed graphics for an 8-bit computer system. I mean, look at this. The colors pop out more. Wait on the title screen for a bit, and you get the backstory setting up the mission. This is set in another pseudo-historical time period where the Cold War continued into 1999, and the world would finally see an end to the threat of nuclear proliferation. But the world's oil supply is drained, and without an alternative to it, they're on the brink of facing a severe energy crisis. A Czech biologist named Dr. Kio Marv develops an algae microbe that can synthesize high-grade petroleum, or just oil. The name of this thing is called Oilix. Ah, I gotcha. Oil mix. While on his way to the United States to demonstrate it, he gets captured by agents from the military nation of Zanzibar land, bordering on the USSR, China, and the Middle East. NATO discovers that Zanzibar land plans to hold the world hostage by controlling the oil supply. On top of that, they seized a stockpile of intact nukes from disposal facilities. That's right. They are the sole nuclear superpower and are planning to achieve world domination. Foxhound, now under the command of Colonel Roy Campbell, brings Solid Snake out of retirement to rescue Dr. Marv. So begins Operation Intrude F-014. You get your main points of contact as you progress without having to spend a lot of time scanning for frequencies. First, you get in contact with a CIA operative by the name of Holly White. She infiltrated Zanzibar land pretending to be a journalist and provides intel by way of helping you navigate the enemy stronghold. George Kassler is a contact you call during boss fights, giving you their background info and highlights weaknesses you can exploit, but I barely contacted him. Finally, you have Master Miller, who gives you survival techniques and guidance on how to deal with any obstacles in your way. For example, did you know that sulfuric acid reacts to chocolate to produce carbon and a rubbery surface to walk on? It's what you do with rations that have chocolate in it. Yep. Certain rations provide different attributes in each meal. For the gameplay, Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake would make some quality of life improvements over the original foundation that makes it higher on the list for me. Starting with the biggest improvement over the original, the enemy behavior. While you had guards being unobservant idiots in the original, Metal Gear 2 gives the guards a 45-degree peripheral view. It doesn't matter how far you are, they will see you. They can also turn their heads left and right to see diagonally, so it requires you to pay attention to their animations. Not only is their vision better, but their hearing as well. When you punch a wall or walk on a certain terrain, they will go to the source of that noise, so use the environment strategically. Lastly, they can move from one screen to another rather than just stay in one area and pace around. When you are detected, the alert mode will go off and a counter will be seen on the upper right part of the screen, showing how much life you have. When the enemy loses sight of you, you will enter evasion mode and a timer will go down. Avoid them long enough to have it reach 0 and the enemies will call off the search. Solid Snake has also made some improvements since his last mission. While you just run in the original game, you can walk and crawl to avoid making noise. You can crouch low when you're standing still. This is very effective in corners to avoid enemy detection. Crawling can also work to your advantage by going through tight spaces like the vents, gaps under fences, and hiding under vehicles and desks. It can also be used to pick up landmines. Try doing that in real life and see what happens. From the start, you are given a new tool for a good advantage out in the field, a reactive radar displayed on the upper right part of the screen. The red dot in the middle is you, and enemy soldiers are represented by the white dots. But when you get detected and enter alert mode, the radar gets disabled. Escape from the guards, and it goes back to normal. The mine detector can be equipped in coordination with the radar to determine where landmines are. The same can be done when you equip the Stinger missiles to take on airborne threats. Thankfully, you no longer have to rescue POWs to increase your rank. Instead, your life and ammo capacity increase when you go through boss fights, and they're much better here. 3 bosses serve a part in the game's story, which is more deep and complex this time around. So let's go through the rest of it. As Snake makes his way through the fortress, he encounters the Black Ninja disguised as Dr. Marv. You avoid his ninja stars and pay attention to his movement patterns to defeat him. His identity is revealed to be Schneider, the resistance leader from the first game. After destroying the TX-55 Metal Gear and escaping Outer Heaven's self-destruct sequence, NATO added to the destruction by launching an airstrike of bunker-busting bombs on their nuclear weapons facility. Many soldiers and war orphans within range were caught in all of that. It didn't matter if they had ties to Outer Heaven or the Resistance. Schneider survived, along with several stragglers. As we saw from the ending monologue in the last game, Big Boss isn't dead and he would rescue them. They continue to live on, serving under him in Zanzibar land. In his final moment, Schneider decides to help Snake by giving him a clue to Dr. Marv's actual location. Why? Because he doesn't hold a grudge against him and believes Big Boss would want that. I mean, that just brings him one step closer to getting his revenge on Snake, so you served your purpose well, Schneider. Bye. After tailing a Green Beret soldier from afar, you go into a building and find it empty, but you hear noises coming from the other side. This is a tap code. This happens on a couple of occasions, and deciphering them is needed to progress forward. The only ways it can be done is to look up the tap code charts in the game's manual, find it in the wiki, or just watch a walkthrough. This is like the precursor to alternate reality games where you do actions outside the actual game in order to progress. It's a clever concept to try and get you to be a part of the experience, but it's pretty confusing when you don't know what to do. Seriously, I'm not well versed in military signals or codes, so best to just use the guide. Once you decipher the code through the transceiver, you find out that Dr. Madnar from the first game got captured along with Marv to help develop a new mech called Metal Gear D. D. After gathering more equipment on the way, including Stinger missiles to fight a Hind D, there it is again! Snake makes it to the tower building. A captured Holly calls him, and through her clues, he manages to rescue her. She gives him a clue about Dr. Marv's location from a carrier pigeon on the roof. Using his rations to lure the pigeon, he finds a piece of paper which is a secret code to contact him. Unfortunately for Snake, Marv doesn't speak English. Madnar informs Snake to look for Gustava Hefner, an STB agent that was acting as their bodyguard. Snake finds her and learns that Marv is safe in a prison north of the tower building. They descend into the sewers and find Madnar was moved to a different cell. With the two behind Snake's back, they find a passageway that leads to an elevator to ascend to the path of the prison building. Madnar asks for a quick bathroom break, and Snake and Gustava get to know each other. She asks Snake if he was married, and he reveals that he never had a family. Gustava reveals her past to him. Although she was best known as an Olympic figure skater who won the Calgary Olympics, she has always been alone. She fell in love with a man named Frank Hunter. She was to be engaged and elope with him to America, but was denied citizenship. She was stripped of her competition rights and her family was left humiliated. So that's what led her to join the STB. The doctor rejoins the group and they head to the elevator going up. Upon getting to a bridge, Madnar is able to cross, but as Gustava makes it to the middle of it, she is not so fortunate as she is killed by a missile destroying the bridge. The cause of that was Metal Gear D, piloted by Grey Fox from the first game, only this time he left Foxhound and joined forces with Zanzibar land. Dr. Madnar is taken away by guards and Fox threatens Snake to leave. In Gustava's last moments, she hands Snake her brooch as it contains a key hidden inside. Holly contacts him to pick up a hang glider and climb to the top of the tower building to make it to the other side. As he gets pursued by guards, Snake determines the wind direction and takes off. He finally makes it to Dr. Marv's cell, only to find he's dead due to his body taking a toll on the torture sessions he went through. At his bedside, Madnar says that he was unable to save him, but Holly contacts Snake and reveals the doctor's true colors. After being rescued from Outer Heaven, his speculations were rejected in the West, and he was considered a madman in the scientific community, eventually being outright forgotten. As a means of revenge, he decided to join Zanzibar land as a double agent to feed them intel about technological secrets from both the East and West. He constructed the new Metal Gear on his own volition and went after Dr. Marv's Oilix research by means of torture. He also reveals that he constructed the ambush from earlier due to his little bathroom break. Damn. First Grey Fox and now Dr. Madnar were gunning against Snake the whole time? The people that were once Snake's allies have turned on him by means of becoming something they considered far greater after dealing the hand they've been dealt? Madnar proceeds to kill Snake, but from a few blasts from his remote control missiles and grenades, he gets put out of commission. The Oilix research is hidden within this locker, and we find out that Gustava's brooch is a key that changes shape at certain temperatures. Heating it up opens this locker where you find a tape that plays the Zanzibar Land National Anthem as a means to distract guards. Freezing it opens up Dr. Marv's locker. Hidden inside is a hole full of rats that you take out by luring them with cheese from another ration unit. Finally, you retrieve the Oilix research that is hidden inside an MSX2 cartridge with the Konami logo. That's a pretty meta and clever way to hide something. Props to Marv. But more accurately, Props to Kojima. As Snake is about to leave, Dr. Madnar reveals how to destroy Metal Gear D by attacking the legs, since that's where the armor is weakest. He tells him to do it for his daughter Ellen as he expresses his guilt over what he has done. After that, a trapdoor opens, leading Snake downward to Gray Fox. Now we've come to a real Metal Gear boss fight this time around. Taking the advice from the old man, we destroyed the new Metal Gear, but not without the explosion destroying our equipment in the process. With nothing left to fend for himself, Solid Snake and Gray Fox come face to face in a room full of mines. George Kassler reveals to Snake that Gray Fox was known as Frank Hunter, who in the mercenary trade was known as Jäger, which means hunter in German. On top of that, Gustava was his former lover. All that has to be done here is to avoid the minefield and time Gray Fox's movements along with Snake's. Punch him enough times and the challenger is down for the count. Fox reveals to Snake that in the past, he was saved by Big Boss twice out in the field. Once when he was a kid living in Vietnam being forced into labor camps after that country's war. The other time he was saved was in Mozambique after being tortured as a Renamo soldier. He says that he hates war, but in the end, he needs it to give his life meaning, to survive. Big Boss was that person to give that to him, the rest of the soldiers, and the war orphans in Zanzibar land. This was their true outer heaven. We get the cartridge back and finally come face to face with Big Boss again. He confirms everything that Gray Fox said about him being their savior. In his world, conflict never ends. When there is peace, soldiers aren't needed to fight. The children we saw were victims of war somewhere in the world, but they are rescued and eventually become soldiers themselves in the next one. It's an infinite loop, their entire purpose for being. Is it possible that this game is giving us reasons to empathize with the villain? Yeah. But we still ultimately see his methods as extreme, since it means bringing the whole world to ruin. So Snake is here to break the cycle and take him down. He's doing this not for the country he serves, but of his own ideals he lives up to. Regardless of the consequences he faced after the events of the Outer Heaven Uprising, he still decides to kill Big Boss and put it all behind him. Gathering the materials he needs while avoiding Big Boss's attacks and these acid puddles, Snake creates a makeshift flamethrower and incinerates the bastard. Snake and Holly reunite and make their escape. They ride off into the sunset and deliver the Oilix research to Colonel Campbell. They confirm it straight out as the MSX boot-up screen has Dr. Marv's name written backwards. Snake makes himself scarce as he heads back into retirement. And that's Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. Truly a major step up from the original and one of the best 8-bit video games ever made. I beat it in 4 hours and 32 minutes, and this is from both using the guide when necessary and experiencing a complex story that changes the way we look at the characters from the first game. While it may not be as complicated like later entries would be, we understand where Dr. Madnar, Gray Fox, and Big Boss are coming from after what Snake has done to them. What at first seemed to be another black and white story becomes gray as it goes on. So what does the player get out of this? Well, it's up to them. This is definitely where Hideo Kojima's quirkiness and smart writing began to bloom. He doesn't half-ass or one-side anything. What you see is what you get. There's even story and gameplay elements that may be familiar if you have played Metal Gear Solid, which came out after this. Examples of that are Snake being forced out of retirement to be convinced to do the mission, a mysterious caller claiming to be Snake's #1 fan sending advice to him, battling a ninja, facing against a Hind D, climbing up the tower while guards chase after you, changing the key in different temperatures, Snake taking on a Metal Gear in full force and fighting his rivals soon after, the hero and his companion making their escape. There is a lot that Kojima would take into his future projects. It goes to show, reusing elements is not inherently a bad thing as long as you're willing to flesh them out more. This is the best 2D representation of the series and more sophisticated than the era it released. Keep in mind, this was released in 1990, a transitional period where games were getting much better from 8-bit to 16-bit. Kinda makes me wish we had a 16-bit Metal Gear game, but Kojima would move on to making Snatcher and Policenauts after this. But you know what? It won't stop people from making it themselves. Hey indie devs, let's talk. Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this and the last video as they are the start of much bigger things to come. It's great to have you here. Consider liking and sharing the video around. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and all that jazz. I really appreciate it. Now is the time to put the passion and effort for MGS1's 25th anniversary. I will catch you lot later.